So in today's video, we'll talk about the present moment, the space in the present moment, and we'll be looking at the first phenomenon. Okay. So we want to look at the first phenomenon that occurs in the space in the present moment. So there is the space in the present moment, and then there is the first phenomenon that occurs in that space in the present moment. The same space that is in me or outside of me that I can perceive is the same space that is in you and is outside of you that you can perceive. The space itself is not different, except you put into consideration what the space carries, what it carries as its background, for its background. Okay. So if you are looking at the space which is in your moment, the same space which is in my moment, the same space which is in everybody's moment, if you think about it, you'll notice that the same space is where everybody exists in. The space gives us space to exist. So everybody is in this space, existing. Okay. So everybody this is space. There is no barrier to it because it has been observed to have no barriers. Yeah, it has no, but it would have been better to just put it in a box to identify space in a box. Okay. So what my eyes can see, the space, is different from what this person's eyes can see, is different from what this person's eyes can see, is different from what this person's eyes can see, not because the space is different, but because there is difference in the background, what the space holds as a background. So for example, if you are watching this in your sitting room, then the space holds for a background the texture of your chair, the walls, whatever contents the sitting room carries. So that's the background of that space, and it is limited to that space. Same way that the space in my presence is limited to me, not because it is only I that can see it, but because that is the background that space is holding at the moment. That's the background on which space is, the background on which the space itself holds. Okay. So there are different people. Okay, because that is the background. That is what carries the background of my experience. So space is what carries the background of my experience and everybody's experience. Okay. So let's take a look at the first phenomenon. So imagine that the vibrations, these waves from that's the indication of space. That's the indication of space in the moment. Because the space that we see, it's actually it, it's an invisible vibration. It is not there to be seen, but it can be experienced. Okay. So this space carries all experiences. It carries all of the experience that can possibly exist, such that if there was no personal observer, so if there was no personal observer, the wave's form remains in its wavy nature, which is just invisible vibrations. Invisible vibrations is space, and it is not the space far away from you, it is the space right here in this moment, the space that contains the background of my existence, of my experience, is the same background that contains the content of your own experience. Okay, so when you move from A to B, from B to C, the background changes. Okay, the background changes. So whenever this guy, you or I, move around within the space in the presence, see, the space doesn't change itself, but the background of it changes. But the background and the foreground is made up of the same substance. So we'll look at that later. Okay. So when this guy moves around, there is a change in the content of the background. The background changes, and that gives us the impression that there is movement, because there is somebody in here too who has the ability to change without recognizing that change is happening. Just the way the space remains wavy no matter what is going on, whether there is an observer or there is no observer, the space remains wavy. So it is the space can exist independent of an observer. Just as when you go to bed at night, the activities of the outside world continues, interrupted by the absence of your awareness. Even though your awareness is so important that it carries the whole thing. Your awareness is so important that it carries the whole nature of space. It's in its infinite form. It carries everything. But at the same time, where it is carrying it is not in this physical reflection or projection. Okay, so that takes me to the so talking about the foreground of space. So if the space has a background, then it must also have a foreground. Okay. So where is the foreground of space? Okay, so the foreground is like what what people talk about, what is alive, and um, what conversations, um, what brings up conversations. Okay, it's the foreground of any activity, not the background, even though the background is just as important. Okay, so the space in the moment has the background as well as the foreground, right? And in the background of space, there is all these activities going on. There are other human beings living just as much or as alive as you are inside of the background, even though that this awareness is based on the fact that you know that you are aware. All right. All other activities are going on because of your awareness, because of your knowing. A knowing that doesn't need to be said with words. It just goes on knowing itself to be aware of the presence in the present moment. Okay. So the space has a background and has a foreground. And if we have a picture, let's say that there's a picture. So let's say this guy in this space, in this spatial awareness, is observing a picture on the wall in his room. Okay? So this guy lives all the nature, all the experiences going on in the moment. Maybe a car is driving by, or two people are walking by, or something is going on in the kitchen that he is not aware of, or the government just gave some laws or rules that would affect his freedom to move around, or something in the Antarctic Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean just happened, and it's all going on the screen of space. Or perhaps some aliens just landed on Mercury. Okay, all this is going on the screen of space, right? Anything that can be thought about, anything that you can imagine is happening already on the screen of space. Okay, so all these are going on is on the screen of space. Even from where he's looking from, which is say the eyes, let's use the eyes for now, to the point where the picture is, there is so much space going on there that he completely ignores it. You know, even though there is space even right there, it's ignored. You bypass the space to look at the picture, but more importantly, the foreground of the picture, the person in front of the picture, or the art, the subject of the picture is, we pay more attention to that rather than the background of the picture. The background of the picture is just complementary, right? So just as we do we perform while we are looking at the outside world, we also do the same, we make the same error while we are trying to look for God or look at consciousness, because looking at consciousness is what makes you become as conscious as it is. But if you don't know how to look at it properly, okay? So just like this guy who misses the whole magic going on, the magic that causes an event that can give somebody an idea that they can look at a picture on the wall rather than just continuously realize the magic of the space. Okay, because the space holds, the space is everything. The vibration, the invisible vibration called space, is everything. So if this guy is inside of the space, okay, all his head, his hands, his legs, or our hands, our legs, everything that he or she is made of is dwelling inside of the space, that holds every other form, then, and he or she is aware of this fact, then the person can decide to look at the foreground of space, since it can already see the background of space. Okay. And it knows the background of space not as formlessness, not as form, but as the marrying of the invisible vibration, the invisible space in the present moment, and the form it pretends to be in the moment, the form it carries in the moment. So it does not allow the forms, the changing forms of the space to distract him or her from the fact that there is something invisible first happening, carrying those changing forms. An invisible phenomenon is going on that carries all changing phenomenons, and is able to be aware of that invisible phenomenon, which he has come to understand as eternal. He has come to understand that this invisible phenomenon is eternal in nature. So, in order to look for the foreground, he cannot look anywhere outside. He or she cannot look anywhere outside, because anywhere he or she looks outside is part of the background of space. So the only place to look is within. So what does it see within? So so since the observer cannot see the foreground outside, it chooses to look within. Okay. As it goes within, it notices something. Okay. This represents two eyes. Two eyes. And this represents the inner world. Okay. The circle represents the inner world because it can just be represented as that rather than flat, the way space is represented. So while space is flat in the outside world, in the inside world, it's a circular phenomenon happening where there are, there are so many activities going on inside of this place. But right here we have the light. Okay, the spark of light. The spark of light is something that is inside a pot of thought processes. So when the observer chooses to look within, it goes within and notices so many thought processes going on. Also, it notices sounds coming in from one particular part of himself. Okay, so this spark of light doesn't see itself at first. It doesn't see itself at first when the observer chooses to go within. Okay, it doesn't see itself because there's so many thought processes covering everything. It doesn't even see that it has two eyes that it uses to perceive some other alternate reality outside of the one that he or she is living in here. He or she has no awareness of that. But if they continue the practice of looking within to just observe, which is the practice of meditation, soon the light becomes bright. Just one spark, one small little dot, and then it becomes brighter. And then these thoughts will be noticed to move alongside emotions. Okay, soon every thought will carry its own emotions. Okay, and when there is a unity between the thought and emotion, then there's just sensation. Okay. So when there's unity between the thoughts and the emotions, then there's just sensation, feelings, vibration, just a movement happening. There is no judgment between this or that. There is just sensation. Something is happening in the body and there is nobody aware of it. Okay? And then soon enough, as you continue meditating, this sensation will appear as a veil. It will appear like a veil, something that covers something else. Okay? It appears like a veil. And that veil covers this whole thing, most especially what these two eyes are experiencing. Okay? So that veil can be dropped. The veil itself can be dropped. Observation is still going to be going on by nobody in there while the veil is dropped. When the veil is dropped, then you can see more clearly. There is the experience of seeing more clearly because this whole place comes alive. It comes alive with its own reality, which happens to be eternal compared to the reality that comes from the play of this light into the eyes. The play which is heavily influenced by the kind of thought patterns or emotional stuffs going on inside the head of that person. So the first part we looked at the background, and then the second part we said that the foreground itself is covered by a veil. Okay, the veil is covered by a veil of thoughts and emotions and feelings, sounds, sensations. And that when there is observation going on without the presence of anybody there, then the veil can drop. And when the veil drops, then reality is seen more clearly. Okay? And the light from that reality, rather than the thought processes or the emotional processes that are stealing this one tiny light and using it to create a matrix. So yeah, so our thoughts are the prison wards of the matrix because they are the ones who trap our light. Our thought forms are what traps our light and form them in the way that they've been conditioned to work based on tradition, history, and all that. Okay, so I hope this video helps. I'll see you in the next video.